Hi, and welcome to the New Earth podcast, which will guide you towards awakening and the embodiment of your highest self through holistic living advice, science, yoga, personal experiences, and expert guests. Let's grow together and build a new Earth. I'm Nancy Crupi. I'm a scientist and I have a PhD in biology and 15 years of international scientific research experience in fields from inflammation to aging, neurobiology, nutrition, metabolic disorders, and much more. I'm also a Kundalini Awakened spiritual teacher, healer, and coach, and I practice and teach Kundalini Tantra.
And I'm Robie Newman-Paris. I'm a biologist with experience in neuroscience, and I've studied the ancient yogic sciences as well as other Eastern philosophies with gurus and yogis while spending a year and a half in India and in Bali. I now teach Kriya Yoga, breathwork, and meditation and help guide people in their spiritual development. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the New Earth podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing post-traumatic stress disorder and the role that it plays in the awakening process, or really the inhibition of the awakening process.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. And first of all, I want to give you the tip of the day. This is aloe vera juice that I'm drinking with fresh sliced lemon in it. And you can buy aloe vera juice as a concentrate or as a pre-diluted bottle. It's really good for you. It's antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. And so because of that, it's also anti-cancer, anti-aging. It has a lot of good properties. It helps your bowel movements and it nourishes you from the inside out. And so it helps you with your skin, with your all your inner organs, and with your also mental health. So let's start our topic today, which is PTSD. So PTSD really is a disorder due to stress. Is basically the kind of disorder we develop as a consequence of stress, of stressors. And traumas are stressors as much as hostile environments are stressors, toxic relationships are stressors, and potentially even big dietary changes or in general, big environmental changes or stress are forms of stressors that can trigger the same kind of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. So the shape that it takes can be very various, but overall it's cognitive dissonance and symptoms such as lack of memory loss, lack of capability of connecting with your intuition, disconnection from your body, disconnection from your moods, so mood disorders and related, and a lot of psychosomatic illnesses as well. Because once you're basically PTSD is you being constantly on your fight or flight mode. And when you are in your fight or flight mode, really you're disconnected from your body, you're disconnected from your spiritual self. So all of those things together holistically really give you an idea of what PTSD is, which is really a huge disorder that hugely affect your capability of thinking clearly, as much as your capability of eating healthy and of having healthy relationships, and of you're more prone to depression, you're more prone to eating disorders, you're more prone to metabolic disorders because of PTSD. So you, Robbie, do you have any experience on PTSD? And I feel like today our main topic is not just PTSD, but really overcoming PTSD as a step, as a milestone towards awakening. So how about you, Robbie? What's your experience?
Yeah, before I jump into like my personal experience, I wanted to just add a couple things to your description. I think one of the important things is that, PTSD, anxiety, depression, all of these psychosomatic disorders, they're all comorbid. So when you have one, you're much more likely to be disposed to having other ones. They function together. It's almost like, the family of evil step parents and step uncles that are all conspiring to create your downfall. So when you have one of these disorders, the other ones are much more likely to spring up and they can worsen each other. They feed each other. So it's really important to understand how all these things are kind of tied together and they all relate to our mental emotional state. And just to touch on the subject of yoga and how this kind of relates to PTSD, in the yogic philosophy, that we have different levels of our body, different sheaths is the word that is used. And you can break these down into like the physical body, the mental body, the emotional body, the energetic body. But from the yogic perspective, a disorder like PTSD is basically a misalignment of these bodies. So when you have, your physical body might be unhealthy, so you're not quite in alignment in the physical sense. Your mental body is out of alignment, meaning that, your thoughts and your mental patterns aren't pure and they're not serving you. Your energy body is out of alignment, so that means that you don't have energy. You're sluggish, you're lazy, you're not motivated. And all of these things feed together, and only when all of them are aligned in the center, that's when you can be your true highest potential healthy self. Um, in the sense of my experience with PTSD, and I know we touched on this already in several previous episodes, but depression is something that's run in my family. It's something that I've definitely dealt with, and my sense with my experience with PTSD specifically definitely comes from a comorbidity with that depression, where when I would kind of have a certain thing that would happen to me, maybe I'm in school and I say something a little bit embarrassing, because I was already in that depressed, kind of anxious state of mind, my mind would over dramatize whatever that action was, whatever thing I did. So it got me into this loop of, feeding my cycle of anxiety, where, things that wouldn't ordinarily be a huge trauma became bigger traumas for me. And, in the sense of, the initial seeds of these traumas, definitely there's some things, in my early childhood where, there was some deep wounds. And this is like we've talked about also in the episode on trauma, like these wounds that you get in early childhood are the underlying seeds of many of these disorders as they sprout and as they, come into their full effect later in life. So my experience with PTSD came primarily from that. I've also definitely had some experiences with PTSD from relationships, and this is definitely from, relationships that weren't healthy, that weren't serving me. But when you kind of enter into this relationship where it's very toxic, it's very codependent, and it's very much like overwhelming to you, because there's some things in it that seem very, very good, and you're very desirous of these aspects of the relationship, but the aspects that are causing you this repeated trauma that leads to the PTSD, you ignore them because of how overpowering the attraction, or how overpowering your mental image of this other person is. So I've definitely had instances in past relationships where, because of my own, I guess you could say, ignorance or lack of awareness of what was actually best for me, and my fear of losing out on, the partner that I was codependent with, led me to have these wounds of PTSD that definitely, affected how I viewed relationships in the future. And, these are things in terms of how to overcome this. It's all about understanding the root cause and seeing through the eyes of intuition, through the eyes of wisdom, back in that initial moment. So a helpful meditation that I've done with this, just to give you a brief description of this, and we'll touch on the more details in a later episode, but putting yourself back in your shoes at that time with the understanding that you have now, and trying to see it from the outside perspective. So you're almost witnessing these events not as your old self, but as your present self, watching the movie of the past actions and seeing it as, okay, this is my old self that acted in this way. This is what happened, but I can still bring love to that version of myself. I can heal that version of myself, because when you have these wounds, they get kind of locked in like a temporal space that lives in our memory. So in order to access it, to heal that, oftentimes it's necessary to relive it to some extent, but to relive it from a new perspective, where you can bring in light, you can bring in love, and you can, heal that part of yourself that's wounded in that time space. So that's a brief overview of like my experiences with PTSD. I'd love to hear also what your experience has been with it, Nancy.
Absolutely. And we are going to be talking today. I think it's best to talk about all these strategies to overcome PTSD as well, so that we give people not just the problem, but also the solution at the same time, which is beautiful, especially when we talk about PTSD, because PTSD is really something that kind of traps you into this mindset in which it's difficult to get out of it for various reasons that we're going to explain from a neurobiological standpoint later on in the episode. And my own experience of PTSD is really related to narcissistic abuse and various forms of like gaslighting and abuses of like emotional and psychological abuse. And that caused me to really go into I feel like I did experience some depression as well, although I tend to have depression does not really run in, but like it does probably run a little bit in my family, but not really. We tend to be very kind of reactive kind of people. So I don't really have a lot of, to give you an example, my aunt says the depression doesn't exist because they have never really experienced it. You know, obviously this is something not nice to say for all the people who experience depression, but just to give you an example of how my family is, we really are not that kind of people that fall into depression that easily. Probably there is also a neurobiological reason for that, genetic determined. And so I feel like I did have a little bit of depression, but I tend to really, as soon as I touch rock bottom, immediately that becomes the trigger for me to get up. So for me, the lower I go, the more I react. So the main thing instead that really was kind of like a challenge for me that I had to really overcome was more the, not even the anxiety, but the brain fog, the lack of mind clarity, of clear decision making that PTSD brings with it. Because PTSD is really a form of hyperactivation of certain areas of the brain that ultimately, because they're hyperactive, they start controlling everything things that they shouldn't control, and so I started having anxiety, not just mind anxiety, but body anxiety. Because again, I'm very resilient, really, really resilient. And so my mind reacts to things, but my body, it's just out of my control. If my heartbeat goes too fast, there's nothing I can do. So I had a lot of body psychosomatic illnesses due to PTSD, which include infections, for example, because your immune system starts being not very strong when you're on PTSD for too long. And so I started having opportunistic infections, for example, or I will have brain fog, lack of clear capability of making clear decision making and effective decision making, or I will be more easily triggered. I had some time in my life in which, when I was before my awakening, I was just more easily triggerable, or I don't usually easily cry. I would cry for like very kind of small things because I was like overloaded. And so it was really like, I feel like for me, it was PTSD, the limit that really became the challenge for me to overcome was the limit that my body, my physical body, allows me to sustain. Because even with your mind, you can be even clear-minded at some point, but if your body is exhausted, if your body is inflamed, if your body is tired, if it's on fight or flight mode, there's really not much you can do unless you really rest. You have to rest and allow your body to reset. And that's why we develop all these psychosomatic illnesses, because it's really our body screaming to us and yelling to us, you have to rest, you have to stop, you have to reset. And so I had all of these really things like cardiovascular issues, like palpitations, arrhythmia, and all these kind of things that were really ultimately due to stress and to PTSD, because that's PTSD, but it was like advanced stage PTSD because I really had a lot of psychosomatic issues. And that became the challenge for me, because when your body starts crumbling down, it starts really kind of giving up and not allowing you to react in the way that you would like to react. Like my mind is very resilient, and so I would like to react back, but my body is like, no, I can't. This is something I cannot do anymore. And so that's when diet also becomes fundamental, because at that point, it's all about also what kind of nutrients you're giving to yourself. Not just diet, but like all the habits that support our well-being, our physiological well-being. Because the more you have physiological well-being, the more you're capable of reacting also from a physiological standpoint, not from just cognitive standpoint. So I feel like that was really my main challenge more than depression. I did have depression a little bit too, but I feel like I have, for me, it's just like something that lasts almost a day or a couple of days or a few days, and then I react. I'm like, I'm not like this usually. So I can see a huge difference with my usual self. And so I react immediately. So that was really my biggest challenge, like the physiological effect of PTSD.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. I wanted to highlight a couple of things you said there. Number one was, the physiological component of these disorders is huge. And that's something that people that don't suffer from them don't really realize. A lot of people think, oh, anxiety is only a mental disorder. It's something that, maybe they know about the brain fog, they know about, the pattern of repetitive thoughts. But, the way that our mind works and how well or how poor it's functioning directly affects our body. And when our mind is out of alignment, it brings our body out of alignment. And it's like this domino, like cascading effect of dominoes falling. Once one thing goes, then it almost is like spreading out in all these different directions. It's creating these ripples of effects in all the different levels. And that's why it's important, I think, to not just focus on, the mental techniques for getting out of PTSD and getting out of depression and getting out of anxiety, but there's also physical things that need to be done, because when you combat this problem, it's important to come at it from all these different angles so that you're not only treating the root cause, but you're also helping to stem the ripples that are coming out. So that's why like things like exercise, getting fresh air, grounding, where you put your feet onto the ground, these things really help your body to reset and to regain its homeostasis, because the homeostasis is really the critical factor here. That's how we come into our highest state of being. Once we are able to find that balance, then we're able to rise up. It's like a tree in like a big windstorm. I don't know if you've seen a tree that grows on like the side of a mountain where the wind is always blowing one way really strong. It's going to only have branches on one side. And that tree is not balanced. That tree is not healthy. It's, barely surviving. We want to be like, the big oak tree in the center of the forest that's branching out in all directions, but more importantly, has a very deep and intricate root system, because that root, which is our physical body, is the root of everything is the physical body, in the sense that that's how we feel grounded, that's how we feel connected to this earth. So it's important to not just think about the mental aspects of something, but to, like you said, with nutrition, with exercise, with also giving your body rest when you really feel like it needs it. Oftentimes burnout can be a really big factor that contributes to these psychosomatic disorders, where because of the grind culture that we live in, we push ourselves too far, and we get to the point where our body is continuously overloaded. Like maybe in one week we're behind from like 4 hours of sleep, but then we only recover 2 on the weekends, and then by the end of the second week we're behind 6 hours of sleep, and it just is this continuing cycle where it's impossible to escape. So it's important to both rest and then also engage in healthy habits. Give your body things that serve it, both in the terms of the nutrients that you consume and the ways that you move it. Like even something as simple as, sitting down slouched in the chair like this right now, this is not a healthy position for your body. And you want to be, upright, keeping your spine straight. And this allows, not only in the yogic sense where it allows the energy to flow smoothly in the energy channels that are around your spine, but even in the more physical sense, it allows your blood to flow more smoothly. It allows, the nutrients to reach all of the cells rather than being cut off from certain places. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. And then the other thing is just to touch more on that brain fog, because I think that's another thing that really affects people a lot in this modern era. And it's something that's also, stimulated on purpose by a lot of different things in the world around us, whether it's the constant bombardment of, sensory inputs from our phones, from, the televisions, from all of the advertisements, from all of the harsh noises around us. One of the ways that we can react to that if we're not fully balanced is by kind of withdrawing into you know a more disconnected state, and that disconnected state results in that brain fog, because you're not fully interfacing with the world, you're not fully aligned and connected with yourself, so you're not operating at the highest capacity. And so it's important to also, do things like retreats into nature, where, maybe you go on a hike on the weekend and you get away from all of that constant bombardment. You just have time with yourself, where you're getting exercise, you're getting fresh air, both of which are very good for your body, but you're also giving your body a break from all of that constant sensory stimulus. And it allows you to have a chance to reset, to find that rebalance, that regrounding. And, to step out of the brain fog, you really need to be living a full, balanced, healthy life, because you can't function at your highest capacity without having all of those facets filled out to at least a certain percentage. It doesn't have to be like perfect in everything. Obviously, we're not perfect beings. So there has to be some areas that maybe have to take a little bit of a sacrifice at some points, but it's important to bring your awareness so that, there's not one area that's lacking too much, so that you are able to, be in the center of yourself, be in that balanced state.
Yeah, I like the idea that you said, especially about the balance. I mean, everything really. There's so much to say about this topic that really we are going to give incredible content today. And really, the balancing is something that I feel a lot, to the point that I started having my own theories on how these unbalancing of our energy really affects us in a lot of ways, which includes our posture. For example, our posture is so important, because what people don't understand is that, and this is something that I have discovered also firsthand. So I'm not just talking about what the book says, which is what the book truly say, but it's also something that I have personally experienced, which the main points in which the energies in our body are stored are the Kundalini energy at the base of our spine. And I did have a Kundalini awakening, so that energy is active in me. So I have to really be careful with my posture, because I can feel that if my posture is not correct, that energy gets channeled in the wrong way, and it has to express itself. And I started having acne, for example, at some point after that, because my posture was not correct, was not proper. And I really could feel that this energy was like bubbling up and expressing itself with an angle that is not really healthy for my body, because if it goes through the spine and it goes up, it forces my crown chakra to activate. And so it brings me more awareness, more awakening. But instead, if my posture is wrong, it really gets channeled in the wrong way, and it skips the crown chakra, and it expresses itself on the skin and on my heart, and in different other ways, on my throat. And so it's really important to really have a steady posture. I think I'm really starting to think maybe I would like to do some research on this to evaluate how the posture affects acne, for example, or the expression of stress through the skin, because stress is really like a boiling pot inside of our body, like the pitta kind of energy that really boils up and expresses itself outside in various ways. And the other important source of energy is the Muladhara and the Swadhisthana chakra, which is the root chakras. And those as well are oftentimes they're usually affected by PTSD, because those are the base of our cervix and the anal sphincter and the clitoris, basically, in women. And so those areas specifically can be very, very disrupted, energetically speaking, by PTSD. So all these energy that we have at the bottom of our body really has to bloom up, has to express itself up. And the fact that our posture really affects a lot the way in which we can channel this energy through our crown chakras, or channel it towards other parts of our body in ways that are really non-healthy. And this is not just for people who had an awakening or a Kundalini awakening. This is everybody. People who had a Kundalini awakening simply are more aware of these energies, become aware of them, but we all have them. And so we really need to become more aware of our posture for that as well. And I love the idea that you said about the alignment of our energy body, or physiological body, of our spirit. It really feels that way to me. Like, it really feels as if when we're in PTSD, we're really vibrating very, very widely. And so we have a wide vibration of this thing that is not focused and vibrates left and right out of a center. And it really misaligns us, because we are all over the place. We are under stress, we're paranoid, we change mood all the time. We're not focused, we're not clear-minded, we're not connected with the present, with reality, because we're really oscillating so much between these points. And instead, refocusing really is to narrow down the vibration of our physical body, because our body also has a vibration. Our cells, everything we do has a vibration. Our soul, our energy body, everything, we can narrow it down and focus it so that it becomes still. That's really the goal here. And PTSD really kind of, it's a stressor that basically pushes. It's something that hits our energy body, for example, and makes it start oscillating. But it oscillates so much that we kind of lose consciousness during the PTSD. So from an energetic standpoint, that's how it looks like. And then he said something else I wanted to add on. I'm not sure I remember anymore what I wanted to say.
Well, I have something I could add to what you just said while you think about it. It's very interesting what you're saying about, the kind of fluctuation of energy, because this is also something that gets talked about a lot in the yogic sciences. And there's a really interesting way that it's put. There's basically three qualities of energy in the physical manifested world. There's tamas, there's rajas, and there's sattva. So tamas, the best definition is inertia. So this is like the force that's slowing everything down. It's the laziness, it's the sluggishness, it's that brain fog you were talking about before. Rajas means activity, but it's really more complicated than that. And really, the best definition that I've heard for rajas is fluctuation, which is exactly what you said. It's halfway in between the tamas, which I already described, is the inertia, the low vibrations, the lack of energy, the lack of movement, and the sattva, which I'll get to in a second, but is the higher vibrational type of energy. But this rajas is the fluctuation between the two. And this fluctuation means that it's unstable. And so when you have a disorder like PTSD, what's happening is you're getting more rajasic energy, it's fluctuating more, and that's leading towards the tamasic side. So you're both having that fluctuation, and then you're having the qualities of tamas, which are, the sluggishness, the brain fog, the lack of motivation. And then also, just to describe sattva so that we have complete understanding of this topic, sattva is purity. It's stillness, but it's not the kind of stillness that comes out of inertia or lack of energy. It's actually a higher vibrational state of stillness where you have this purity, where you have, the vibration is in coherence rather than like that fluctuation. And because of that higher degree of vibration, actually it brings out this pure stillness. And sattva is the goal of, the yogis. That's what the state that you want to, and there's definitely, that's the baseline. There's more things to do after you reach that state, but to get to that state where you're acting purely, you're acting from a coherent, self-centered, not self-centered in the egotistical way, but self-centered, like you are centered in the center of yourself way, then you're acting purely in the world. Whereas, a lot of forces in the world are creating that pushback into the field of rajas, leading to that fluctuation. So even when you're trying to go to sattva, you're going back and forth in that rajasic field, and then over time you get pushed more all the way to the tamas, where you get into the depression, you get into the sluggishness, you get into the brain fog. You're not coherent, you're not motivated. So it's really interesting that, we have the same kind of ideas about this, both from your own personal experience, my experience, and then also what the yogic science is saying, and also what the scientific understanding of this is as well.
Absolutely. These things are very, very coherent and consistent. And what you described is exactly word by word the personal experience that I had, because it's really like the world is like the obstacle we keep hitting, and that keep sending us back towards the tamas energy. But if you can, it's a lot about persistence. So if you overcome, let me explain. I want to give an analogy for this as well. So imagine you are a flower that is blooming in this field of grass. And so if you start trying to bloom and to go up, initially have a lot of grass to overcome, and there are a lot of obstacles, and you as a flower are very weak. You don't have the power that you need to go through all of these layers of grass on top of you. But after a while, as you grow, you gain strength. And as you gain strength, you keep growing because that's your potential. You're simply realizing your potential. That's what we do. We realize our already inner potential. So as you keep going and you keep going, you persist. You keep breaking these obstacles and going through the grass to the point that you emerge out of the grass. And at that point, you don't have obstacles anymore, and you can bloom. So overcoming PTSD really feels like overcoming all of these layers that not only have to do with inner obstacles, like, for example, my physiological body. And again, it's about I am growing, and so I'm becoming stronger, and I'm also changing my diet. And by doing so, my body is becoming more capable of sustaining different stressors without going into PTSD. By doing that, we get to a point where we get to the sattva energy, which is also where I've gotten now, because now when I meditate or when I center my energy, I can feel that pure energy. It feels really almost as if I have a different person inside of me. It's really a very still person. It is the true me, is the highest, my highest self. But because I'm not fully my highest self all day long, because every time we interact with the world, we get pushed back every time. And so we get farther from that sattva energy that we are. So initially, this is the time in which the flower blooms out of the last layer of grass. And in this time, you keep still having sometimes to go backward and backward, but your sattva becomes stronger and stronger and stronger to the point that you don't even see these as obstacles anymore. They just become something that is past you, is below you. It's something that it doesn't affect you anymore. They're just a background noise because you're becoming so high that you don't actually perceive, they're not obstacle for you anymore. They're just easy things that you don't even need to deal with anymore. And so this is really not something that only a yogi can do. This is something that every one of us can reach. I have reached it. I'm reaching it. You have reached it. You are working on it. We're all working on it
I would
constantly
say you
because
are a
it's
yogi though, Nancy.
well, in that sense, like I feel like when you have a Kundalini awakening, you become like a yogi without having the yogi.
A yogi is
Because
just
it's
someone, it doesn't mean you're like following the Hindu system. All it means is that you're striving for spiritual development. So you can use any framework to do that. So
yeah,
you're definitely a yogi. Don't worry about it.
you're a yogi. Yes, I feel like everybody can become a yogi regardless of yoga, like in the sense of like reaching that sattva energy that we need to reach. It's really only a matter of like understanding that even though we see all of these obstacles and we perceive these obstacles are as very difficult to break through because we are small, we are designed to encounter only the obstacles that we can deal with. And so if initially we get PTSD, that simply means that we are at a level in which we need to grow more for us to be able to put up with these obstacles that we need to put up with. And as we keep growing and we get stronger and stronger, then we encounter new obstacles because now the new version of us has new type of enemies. I'm quoting enemies because it's really not an enemy. It's like obstacles that we need to overcome. And so as you overcome those obstacles, that makes you grow because for you to overcome those things, you need to grow. And so as you grow, then those are not obstacles for you anymore. And you have new obstacles to overcome. This is just a constant thing in life. And as you do that, you can feel this sattva energy inside of you that grows stronger and stronger. And when you meditate or when you stop and when you recenter, you can feel this energy body inside of you. Especially, I feel it a lot in my chest and in my face. That is really in the inner part of yourself that is very still. It's just very still. It's just this field of energy that is your soul, that is your pure soul, your pure essence, and it's there. And it's really eternal. You can feel that it's not something that gets affected by external factors. It's there no matter what. As soon as you recenter in it, that energy is there, no matter what happens around you. So the PTSD that we get is in reality is just an effect of our body being sensitive to the environment, but our actual energy is untouchable. Like our actual sattva energy is there and is always the same. It is our body that goes through PTSD, not our energy, not our true self, not our soul. So our soul is really protected. It's up to us to understand that. And once you understand that, it becomes also easier to overcome PTSD because you understand that it is your body that is going through certain physiological changes that because of that, you cannot connect with your sattva energy, with your purity, because that energy is there all the time. But unless you center and you synchronize with it and you synchronize on that wavelength, you can't feel it. And so that's really, that fluctuations we're talking about. It's really our body going through changes, our body going through inflammation, oxidation. Oxidation is the word. And the fact that I'm drinking today this aloe vera juice is really not random also, because this is a great way of supporting your body to overcome stress and to go through PTSD. Because what actually happens is that we are like meteors that go through the atmosphere of the earth. And what happens to those bodies is that they get burned. And so this is the same thing that happens to us. We get burned as we grow older because we go through a lot of stressors that oxidize our body from the inside. And that oxidation obviously determines also a decrease in our functions, in our physiological functions, a decrease in effectiveness of our physiological functions. So we go through these oxidative stress constantly. And so the molecules in our body gets oxidized. And when a molecule gets oxidized, it gets targeted for destruction, for example, by our cells. And so we start having lesser molecules that are constantly active and usable by our cells. We start having lesser effective enzymes, lesser effective cells, lesser effective organs. And because of that, really it's like a Gaussian of function of effectiveness of functionality of our organs and our cells, of our molecules. And we start going down from the optimal homeostatic curve, part of the curve, to the part of the curve that is closer to lack of effectiveness. And so because of that, we start really not functioning properly. That is what PTSD is. PTSD is really a part, it's us when we become lesser functional due to excessive stress. But if we overcome it, and this is something we all can do, if we overcome it, we understand that that was just a step that can make us grow, and then it's more difficult for us to fall into PTSD again.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give a little bit of context for the audience about oxidative stress because, for a lot of people, you can kind of think, oxygen, that's what's sustaining our body. How is that creating stress? But it's important to understand for this discussion, I think, just a little bit about the science behind this. So basically, oxygen, and this is not necessarily the form that we breathe, but it's other forms of oxygen they form very reactive molecules. So another name for this is reactive oxygen species, or ROS. And we get these from, overly processed foods. We get these from, breathing in the fumes from car exhaust, from other types of toxins and chemicals in the environment. And basically what happens is when those get into our bloodstream, when those get into our cells, because these molecules are very, very reactive, they have a high binding affinity. So they're able to kind of snatch off other little molecules, other parts of molecules, other atoms from both our DNA structure and also certain proteins. So basically, this is speeding up the degradation of our biochemical body. So the way that we can deal with this is by antioxidants, which is exactly why Nancy brought up the aloe juice. But there's a lot of other sources for antioxidants. Lots of fresh fruits, especially berries and things like this, are very high in antioxidants. So when we talk more about specific diet for awakening, we're going to be bringing up a lot of foods that are high in antioxidants, because what this is doing is it's sustaining your physical body by, rather than those reactive oxygen species being able to bind to the proteins and the DNA structure in our cells, it's being trapped instead by these antioxidants. It's binding to them instead. So it's not being able to create that harsh damage into our actual cells. So that's why it's really important to consider these kind of factors in your diet. And there's lots of other nutrients that are really required to really sustain the body. And again, we'll be talking about this further and more in later episodes. One other thing I wanted to mention, and this is more in regards to PTSD, and this is the victim mentality. And this is something that really appears a lot when we get into these interactions where, there's someone that's creating a trauma or some situation that's creating a trauma. It doesn't even have to be a specific person. It can just be the situations of life that present it to us. We have a big tendency, and this is again, societal conditioning that has made us this way, where, we become the victim of our circumstances. Rather than empowering ourselves to overcome those, we get stuck in this diminutive, this smaller role of the victim. And as the victim, we're unable to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're unable to see the way out of our situation. We just get stuck in our state of suffering. We get just wrapped up and reliving our trauma. And this reliving of the trauma further aggravates the state of PTSD. It creates, you know, that malady in a much more real sense, because, you know, it's inevitable that in life we're going to experience traumas. But what really is under our control is how much effect they have over us by how many times we're replaying them and we're reliving them in our memories. Because what happens every time that your mind drifts back to a certain experience that caused trauma in the past is not only in your mind, it's also creating all of these different biochemical states in your brain that are associated with that experience. So you're releasing all the hormones of stress. Again, you're getting yourself worked up into that fight or flight state, which, even though there's nothing happening around you in that moment, because you're so absorbed in that memory and you're so absorbed in that victimhood, you still have the same effect as if it was happening again and again and again. So the way to break out of that is to, you know, take accountability a little bit, take the power back. It's not necessarily saying that, you know, you're at the wrong for the situations in your life. It's not that. It's the opposite, actually. It's seeing that despite them, you can grow, you can shine, you can overcome these difficulties. So rather than, it's about looking at it from, you know, the pessimistic or the optimistic side. The pessimistic side is the victim mentality, where you get stuck in the position of, there's nothing I can do, these situations are out of my control, I'm suffering here and I can't do anything about it. And that leads to the pessimism, the PTSD, the negative thought loops. But instead, if you switch that to the optimistic perspective, okay, yes, this event happened. Yes, it caused me trauma, but I'm strong. I can overcome this. I'm not going to let this, you know, control me for the rest of my life. So it's really important to switch that mentality to look at things as obstacles that are not impossible to overcome, but, you know, almost like challenges that make you stronger every time you overcome them.
Yeah, absolutely. And having this idea of being adventurous and seeing things as challenges is really empowering. And part of it is also knowing that there's something past it. For example, and I think this really, first of all, is the reason why we're doing this podcast, because it's a way, again, of giving people a path that they can walk towards and they can walk through, so that they know what kind of things they should do to reach awakening. Because once we have a path already laid out by others, then it's easier for us to follow it, because we know there's more. When people get stuck in their victim mindset, it's because most of the times that's what they've learned. That's the maximum they have seen other people walk towards. And for example, for me, I think my mom has been an incredible example of someone who is very resilient. My mom, like, she raised us almost by herself, three women, three girls, and we all went to college, and we all did all, like, you know, we had our struggles. We didn't have the wealthiest lifestyle, absolutely not. But at the same time, we are very intelligent. We are all graduated in college. We all have good lives in the end. So it's really the fact that she has fought a lot of the challenges she encountered, gave me the example to follow, to be like, okay, if I fight, then I reach a better spot. And so I know I have to keep fighting instead of getting into the victim mentality. And that is very important. I would like to add something on oxidation, because it's not just about things that we get from the inside, from the outside, that cause oxidative stress. And first of all, oxidative stress is not just about oxygen. I know that the word oxygen really indicates that as well, but reality is that there are two states that every molecule can be in, which is a reduced state and an oxidized state. A reduced state is simply a state that has more electrons, in a sense, and instead an oxidized state is a state that has lesser electrons. So it's all about also the kind of atoms that are associated with it. So we say oxidized because oxygen is an atom that sucks up a lot of electrons. And so when it gets linked to a molecule, then it kind of sucks up a lot of the electrons towards itself, because he has a big mass and attracts the electrons. So that causes, the oxidation causes basically to reduce the electronic potential, in a sense, of the molecule, because then it gets dragged by the oxygen. So that's why we say oxidized. But reality is that oxidation can happen in a lot of different ways, and it simply means when a molecule kind of loses electrons, in a sense. And that's the combustion that we go through, any form of combustion we go through. And so we combusted constantly, not just through absorbing things from the outside that oxidize us, which is also normal, but also because our body, when it overworks, it produces reactive oxygen species from the inside. And so it produces all of these type of molecules that then oxidize us from the inside. And that's what stress does. So stress forces our cells to produce molecules that burns us from the inside, that combust us from the inside. So we really go through basically combustion and oxidation from the inside of our body unless we counteract that oxidation through food, because the best way of getting antioxidant is actually through diet and through food, not through supplements. So we're going to be talking more about that in the next episode about diet specifically. I wanted to add something more about also exercise. Physical exercise is an incredible way of breaking through PTSD. First of all, because it makes you break the module and kind of break from maybe depression, or maybe, and the problem is always the gap of energy you need to overcome. So it's good to have people around you, to have healthy habits and routines, because those things can really become the rope that takes you out of the hole in case you fall in. Because once you have a routine, once you have a healthy lifestyle, once you have healthy people around you or healthy friends, or once you have really a healthy lifestyle, then it's way easier to get out of PTSD, because you have a lot of ways of doing that. You have a lot of healthy habits that if you go to run every day, maybe you're depressed today, but because you go to run every day, it's a habit. You're like, okay, let's go. But once you go, that takes you out of depression. And so these things are really ropes that we can build for ourselves. So that in case of need, in case our mind is not clear at some point, we have those ropes that are preset for us to take us out of the hole. And not only exercise helps us produce endorphins and serotonin, so it really brings us positive mood, because these are all neurotransmitters and molecules that really help us have a good mood. But also, it's important to consciously exercise, and I explain why. So the reason why we mostly are in our PTSD, in our fight or flight mode, is because we tend to activate, and this is something that I teach people in my classes. So if you guys want to check my classes, check my website. I'll tell about at the end of the episode. What we need to do is to get out of the brain areas that really keep us into PTSD. So those brain areas are mostly in the reptilian brain, which is the most inner part of the brain, and then the limbic brain, which is the part that surrounds it. And those things contain the basal ganglia, which is very much associated with addictions, habits, routines, and any form of cyclical kind of behavior. And the hippocampus, which is about memory. And so when we are in PTSD, we overstress the hippocampus, and oftentimes we have compulsive thinking also. And so we tend to also send it into inflammation and oxidation. And because of that, we lose memory. We start not having good memory, not remembering what we have to do and our tasks. And we need to, at that time, I used to survive out of memos and like notes, because I could not remember things in the short term. And also the amygdala. The amygdala is the most important part of the brain that we need to talk about when we talk about PTSD, because that part is what really manages and handles the fight or flight mode. The amygdala is a small part of the brain, but that part can really grow bigger and bigger for as much stress it has to handle. So the more stress it has to handle, the more the amygdala grows stronger. The problem is that the more the amygdala grows, the more the amygdala activates the fight or flight mode. So that is what PTSD really is. The PTSD is really like an overgrown, a hypertrophic amygdala that starts taking over and starts sending everything into fight or flight mode. But the amygdala also affects our thyroid hormones, our hormones in general, our heartbeat. So the amygdala really can affect our body in a lot of different ways. And that's why I had all of those cardiovascular issues, for example, can affect our inflammatory state, our immune system, like really everything in our body. Because if you're in fight or flight mode, you don't have time to heal. You don't have time to do anything. You have to just survive and run away from the danger and survive. And so all of the other functions of your body become secondary, because the first thing you need to do is to be on PTSD for you to run. So that's really what the amygdala does. So the problem is that in our society, we are constantly on PTSD because we are constantly in a hostile environment. And so unless we understand that we can't really live in PTSD, we just have to either adapt to this society and to start growing and becoming bigger and bigger, or we have to just succumb, because you can't survive in a survival mode. You have to find a way to settle at some point. That's impossible. And so this is the problem with the amygdala. And why I'm saying this related to the exercise is because people don't understand that we function as plants. So how plants work is that a plant performs photosynthesis in the leaves. Because of that, the photosynthesis is like an engine that consumes things and produces other things. Because of this engine that consumes things, the plants start having the need to absorb more of those things, more of those nutrients, including water. And so because of that, it is the leaves, the photosynthesis that happens in the leaves, that drives the absorption of nutrient and of water from the roots. So it is not the roots absorb and then they get dragged to the leaves. It's the opposite. The leaves that function absorb the water and the nutrients and takes them to the leaves. So our brain functions in the same way. Our body functions in the same way. And so if you have a lot of muscles, then your muscles, and you do a lot of exercise every day, then it is your muscle that drives you to eat more protein, for example, because you need more protein to sustain that amount of exercise you do. If you use your PTSD, if you're in your PTSD all the time, and if you're on PTSD while you're exercising, what you're doing is you're sending that oxygen to the part of your brain that is on PTSD, because that is the part of the brain that is active. And so the oxygen goes there because that part is really hyperactive. So it's important to consciously exercise, because what you want to do is ultimately activate the last part of the brain that we need to activate, which is the cortex. The cortical brain is the part of the brain that surrounds our whole brain. Is the most external part. And it's really the part that once it works and it functions, that's the part that gives us the awakening. Consciousness. That's where consciousness is. That's where love is. We can only love if we are out of our PTSD, of our fight or flight mode. Because if you're in fight or flight mode, you really can't love. You have to survive, and there is no room for love in survival. And so we really need to reactivate the cortex. But to do that, we need to really find ways to stay in nature. Staying in nature is something that really reactivates our cortex and takes us away from stress. And by doing so, when you walk in nature and you are absorbing all these oxygen, that oxygen goes there because you're using your cortex as much as it goes in the leaves, because the tree is using the leaves. So the same thing for, like, you want to really be conscious about the kind of part of your brain that you're using. Instead of compulsively thinking, try to really be present when you're in nature. Try to really observe nature around you, because observation is really another way of being present, because you activate your visual cortex, which is here on the back of your head. And once you really observe nature, you really observe the details, and you try to focus on the details, you activate your visual cortex. And by doing so, you attract oxygen there. And then, because the brain is like a sponge, once you attract oxygen in one part of the cortex, then the entire cortex start activating and following these anchoring points that drag the awakening of the cortex. And so we can use sensory organs and observation to reactivate the cortex as much as we can use the witness modality, because also, as we talked about the witness modality multiple times, we can use the witness modality to drag oxygen towards our cortex as well, because the witness modality is simply a conscious, self-aware standpoint that kind of is in our cortical brain, so that once we do that and we're present, we are feeding that part. We are feeding that present. We are feeding the mechanism that allow us, in the cells that allow us to be present, to be observant. And so whatever you're doing, be conscious, because whatever you're doing is really what is driving the kind of molecules you absorb from your food, the kind of food your body is craving, as much as where you're sending the oxygen that you breathe, that you move. Like if you go running and you pump oxygen in your veins through movement, where are you sending it? So be conscious of that, because then you're feeding the plant that you're becoming. So if you do it consciously, it becomes physical exercise become incredibly powerful, because then at that point it becomes a way of feeding the plant, that you feeding the version of you, the sattva energy, the version of you that is already outside of the PTSD.
Yeah, so I mean that's again great points. I really enjoyed listening to your explanation. I think especially like the idea of the plant where it's like, we are growing up and out kind of in that same way, like the spine, like the nerves are the roots of the plants, the spinal cord is the trunk, and then the leaves are coming into the cortex like that. Is and the structure is even very similar, which is really interesting. Yeah, I wanted to just, really touch down again on the 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 consciousness that when you bring your awareness to the actions you're doing, that's how you stay in that present moment and how you get out of the state of fight or flight. And, it relates to meditation too, because many people think, you need to be sitting still with your hands like this, eyes closed or looking up to like the third eye to be meditating. But really, I mean, maybe those things can help you get into the meditative state, but the meditative state is a state of being. It's not a practice. It's not an action. It's a way of being. And you can get into that state whether you're still or whether you're moving. And the ideal, the way that you should aim to live is to try to get into that state as much of the day as you can. So whether you're sitting still actively focusing on the meditation or whether you're doing something else, it's all about directing your awareness to that presence. And exercise is a really great way to do that, because a lot of times we really disconnect our awareness from our bodies. And again, our bodies are our anchors. Our bodies really hold us in this present moment because there's always some sort of sensation happening there. There's always something that you can focus on. But when you get caught up in the mind and its structures, that's how you kind of get sucked into the past or sucked into the future, and you lose touch with what's actually happening around you. And in the past is depression, and in the future is anxiety, and the present is peace and happiness. So bring your awareness into the body. And especially what I wanted to just really touch on, you said this a little bit, but the breath. The breath is really a huge key for anchoring that awareness in your body and in the present moment, because the breath is something that in the yogic sciences, it is literally what is keeping you embodied in this physical world is the breath. And obviously, as we know, when the breath ceases, we're no longer alive. And that's why it has so much power, because the more attached you are to the breath, the more attached you are to your life, the more you're in the presence, like really fully appreciating and understanding the life that you're living. You see everything. And the another interesting thing about the breath is it's a link between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, because it's the one function of the body that you can take control of consciously, but also if you're not focusing on it, it's going to keep happening, right? And that's what makes the breath really beautiful, because when you do bring your conscious awareness to it, it's almost like this bridge that allows you to follow that path back into your subconscious mind, where all of these underlying states exist, like all this, the past trauma, the PTSD, your mental patterns. When you go into your subconscious, you're able to bring the light of your awareness to all these underlying issues that might not get uncovered in the regular path of your life. So you're able to kind of see things again from that witness modality, where you're understanding, okay, this is not my true self. This is just a mental pattern that's been perpetuated in my life from certain actions and certain, traumatic events that happened for me. So that's why there's such a huge focus on the breath in the path of yoga. And, again, most people think that yoga is just the physical postures, but that's really a very small part of it. But again, in the sense of exercise, those physical postures, the way that you do them is very important, because, you might go to a yoga class and they just say, okay, now we're going to do downward dog. And then, okay, we're coming to tabletop and then we're going to upward dog, But really, the way that you're supposed to practice the postures is by bringing your full awareness to the breath and to the body when you do them. So you connect with all of the areas of your body, specifically the ones obviously that are you're working on with a particular asana, um, and that anchors you in the present moment. And what you notice from a yoga session like that, or really from any exercise session like that, where you really focus on the sensations in the physical body, is that you get drawn into the present, no matter how much stress and anxiety and overthinking you're having before. You don't have a choice. You get pulled into that moment. And there's all the neurochemical benefits of the endorphins that you release, you know, all of that builds onto this effect. And when you bring your consciousness to it, it just doubles or triples or even quadruples the magnitude of that effect, so that you're consciously receiving the benefits rather than unconsciously. Because when you're aware of the benefits, they're much more highlighted for you and you see them clearly. So it's very important with any type of exercise that you bring that awareness to it, whether you're in the gym curling dumbbells. Really focus on the physical sensation of your bicep that's contracting and releasing to create that motion. And it's a really beautiful thing that we have these complicated bodies that are able to perform so many functions. And the more that you bring your awareness into that, the more again you bring in that element of gratitude, where you really start to see like how wonderful this body that I'm in is. Because really the body is just like another vehicle, right? It's not innately what is your true self. Your true self is your soul, is your the higher self is beyond all the physical. So when you consider the body as a vehicle for the expression of your pure soul in the world, you start to realize, wow, there's really nothing else that's truly as, harmonious and beautiful, complicated yet purposeful in the world. All of the things that, we've been able to create, all the artificial intelligence systems, all of the, the cars, planes, trains, all of this stuff, it pales in comparison to, the majesty of our physical bodies and what they can accomplish, how, complex, but at the same time balanced and full of potential they are. And most people don't really live up to that potential because, again, goes to like limiting beliefs, like the limiting beliefs that you have because of the power of your mind, they can control your physical world. But when you open up and you start to release those limiting beliefs and you start to see, okay, there's so much more potential here than I really thought, and you start to open up to those possibilities and even expect them in some cases, then the body is truly a magical tool that follows the whim, the dictations of the mind, and it can achieve incredible things. Like, I mean, to give an example in a more mundane sense, there's a lot of stories where, let's say a child is stuck underneath a car, and this car weighs, what is it, like, almost 1 ton, at least like 1,500 pounds. Yet the mother who, maybe hasn't even worked out a day in her life is able to lift that car off of her child because she, in that moment of pure love and pure connection that she has with that child, and she sees it suffering, she releases the limitation on her body and she's able to actually overcome that because she's not even thinking in that moment, there's no way I can pick up this car. She knows I am picking up this car, and she does it. And that just that's the potential of our bodies. We have the potential to achieve incredible things. We just have to believe it.
It's the beetle, because the beetle doesn't know that he can't fly, the beetle flies. It's
Yeah.
really it's really like we truly have incredible potential because we can channel energy. We are really channels for energy, and we can use our body as form of leverage leaves. How do you say
Leverage.
that?
Leverage, yeah.
Leverage, form of leverage to channel energy that doesn't necessarily come from our body, it can come from our soul, from the universe itself, from the outside. We can channel energy through our body and use our body as a tool to channel that energy. But because we think we are our body, that is the limitation that we have. And so we believe that we can only do the things that our body allows. Yes, we can, but also it is true that we have a lot more potential than that. And this is also what is called the placebo effect, quote unquote. The placebo effect is really our capability of self-healing and our inner potential that Western medicine calls placebo effect, because for them it's just the addition to the healing effect that the pills have. And so it's called placebo effect because that is something that is not due to the intervention that is being studied. But reality is that the placebo effect is our capability of self-healing. And so we have a huge capability of simply healing just because we have faith that we can heal, that we know that we can heal, that we know that we can do something, and then we do that. And so like PTSD has a lot to do with faith as well. Like capability of overcoming PTSD has a lot to do with knowing that you can do that, knowing that this is just, and that's when people have breakthroughs. So then I would like to spend the last few minutes of this episode to just talk about things also that can help people overcome PTSD. One way, and I tell to my clients a lot about that. One is the witness modality as well that we already mentioned multiple times, and we mentioned it in the family trauma, and in the ego and trauma episodes.
Almost every episode. It's a running theme in this podcast for good reason.
It's so important to develop consciousness because that allows you to redevelop your cortical brain. And by doing that, you start being stronger and stronger, because what happens is that the limbic brain, the fight or flight mode structures, anatomical structures of the brain, those parts, when they are active, they turn off the cortex. And so the more you're on PTSD, the more your cortex is off. The more your cortex is on, the more the parts that trigger and that handle your PTSD are off. And so these things are on and off in different times. And so if you strengthen your cortical brain, if you strengthen your consciousness through the witness modalities, through modalities and physical exercise, conscious hiking, consciously being in nature, consciously being present, you strengthen your cortex. At that point, your PTSD related anatomical parts of the brain really start shrinking and get lesser powerful. And because of that, the next time you have a trigger, then it's easier for those parts to be so overloaded by stress instead of being so big that they can handle that stress. They're so overloaded that they go in short circuit and you have a breakthrough and you're like, wait a minute, what is happening to me? I shouldn't go in PTSD. I should just react to this situation with a clear mind, because it's way more effective. But if you instead trigger your PTSD and you're not capable of going out of it because your amygdala and your amygdala is too big, and you have habits that support your compulsive thinking and your intrusive thoughts and your fight or flight mode, then it's more difficult for you to have breakthrough, because your limbic and reptilian brain are so developed, so strong, that they can handle anything. And so they keep you stuck into that modality. And I would like to do some research on this as well, in the sense of oxidation, because I feel like really PTSD has a lot to do with oxidation of in those parts of the brain, really, because they get so overloaded that's what happens. And so one way also, it's important to understand that what PTSD is a state of mind in which once we get triggered, it's difficult to get out of it because we are in it. And so that's the most difficult part for people, because which includes depression, anxiety, any sort of symptom that is part of PTSD. Once it gets triggered, then we are in that kind of brain fog, or in that brain mindset that really doesn't allow us to get out of it, because we don't see that there's anything out of it. We don't realize that we're in the brain fog until we get out of the brain fog. And so one way that I personally have developed and that I use is to have environmental cues and to have a strategy to deal with things and triggers that kind of bring me back to present. Like when I had very deep PTSD at some point, I started writing on my arm with a marker, with a like tattoo kind of marker, but like it was not permanent. A routine to follow every time I would fall into PTSD. So I would just have to look at my arm and I could see this thing, and that thing could take me out of my PTSD. So that's a great way. Using these type of strategies is a great way of having with you everything you need to get out of PTSD. And my routine was to just, as soon as I will see that because the first feeling I will have when I was on PTSD was this sort of anxious feeling, this sort of anxiety, and then it will lead to other things. And so as soon as you have whatever the first feeling of your PTSD is, the best thing to do is to just stop as soon as make it become a trigger for you to stop. That is because habits are so powerful, because they go beyond your conscious self and beyond your conscious mind. They're just automated mechanisms that you can consciously create. So if you realize what the first symptom of your PTSD is, whatever it is, and you observe yourself through the witness modality, in which you just observe yourself from the outside constantly, as soon as that happens, you're going to see that, you're going to perceive that. And so that will become the trigger next time for you to start handling your PTSD immediately as soon as it starts. And one way of doing that is to just stop, breathe, focus on your breath, and breathe in and breathe out, and just relax. And obviously it's going to be difficult to relax, but just try to just breathe and then observe your reactions, your body reactions and your thoughts. And then think about the situation that triggered you or why that triggered you. And I like what you said about observing. We're going to have to touch on that too, to give time to your trauma to observe it at the beginning. So observe it and try to understand why that triggered you. And so then understand that that is most of the times an irrational fear of some sort due to a wrong belief system, or to a trauma, or to something, some sort of paranoia. And so once you understand that that comes from an irrational fear, you can reframe it and understand that that's really irrational, and reframe the situation in a more rational and clear-minded way. Once you do that, at that point, you can restart and take action to change whatever it's causing the trigger, if you can change it, or to deal with the problem in the best way you can. And I have left a post on my website to resolve the issue of PTSD in this way. And I wanted to touch on what you said. I'd like for you to explain better, and then I can give also my take on that, the method that you use to, because in your case, it was mostly, your PTSD was mostly due to trauma that would just trigger your compulsive thinking and your intrusive thoughts. And instead, you have to dedicate time to observe that inner child, that hurt child, and to give it time and to heal and give love to that inner child. So how would you describe that strategy?
So yeah, I mean, I think that the way there's two strategies that I have, and I mean, there's many techniques in each one, but the difference is whether it's a strategy that you implement when you catch in the moment your cycle of PTSD or stress or trauma is starting again, or whether you're in a moment where you're maybe not in that state, but you're in a moment of dedicated meditation where you're trying to go back to that so that you can create that healing. So I'm actually going to start with the other one first, the what you do if you catch it in the moment. And there's two really key important things that have really helped me and also are very important for this. And number one, you said already, which was the breath. So again, what you said, stop what you're doing right away. As soon as you feel that little ping, the heart race, the heart starts racing, the sweat starts coming, the overthinking is coming. You feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders and there's nothing you can do about it. Take a pause and really direct your awareness to the breath. And with this, it's really important to deepen your breath. Consciously slow down and deepen your inhale and have full exhales as slow as you can, because the way that the breath works, again, the breath and the state of your body and mind are directly related, and either one can affect the other. So when you're in a stress and anxious state, your breath is likely to be fast, shallow, and without having much awareness brought to it. But when you're in a calm, more meditative, sattvic state, your breath is more going to be deeper, it's going to be slower, it's going to be relaxed, and you're going to have more awareness of it. So you can effectively also use your breath as a tool to switch your mental state, to get out of that state. And that's by breathing as if you were in a calm, relaxed, peaceful state, which is, again, very deep, long, slow breaths, keeping your awareness to the physical sensations of the breath as you inhale and as you exhale. You do that for a minute or two, and you'll notice a lot of times your stress has already started to melt away, and the state that you're in has kind of been averted. Another really important strategy that you can use, and this one is maybe if you don't have that much time or you feel like it's too overpowering, like there's too much energy in you to really bring that calm, focused energy in your breath, And that strategy is shaking. And shaking is a really good thing to do for psychosomatic release. Like we noticed that this is something that in animals, they do it automatically, instinctually, without any thought. Like I don't know if you've ever seen like a group of ducks and maybe one duck comes over and like grabs the neck of the other duck and like kind of bullies it, chases it away. That other duck, what's it going to do after the first duck leaves? It's going to flap its wings. And that physical action is a release of energy. So as humans, we forget this. And, when we have all this energy boiling and turning inside of us, we don't enact it in a physical sense on the outside, but the energy needs some sort of release. And it's either going to come out in, the release of mental energy, where it's creating the worsening of this pattern. And, maybe like you're restless, you can't sit still, you're kind of like shaking, even if you can't control it. But if you take your conscious awareness and bring it to that and you start, shaking your whole body like this, you release a lot of that energy, and it really allows you to express it in a way that's not damaging to yourself, and it can really calm down your nervous system. So those are the two strategies I would give for if you catch it in the moment. And then to touch on the other side of things, if you're, in a moment of deep healing meditation where, you're already in a calm state and you want to kind of go back to those situations, the way that I look at it, and I'll give a specific example of, let's say there's a person that caused your trauma. Let's say, it was maybe your boss at work that, really was pushing your buttons that one day. Like you said, oh, I need a break. And your boss is like, no, I need you to do this right now. And like you felt like you were victimized. So, and this might be due to other previous patterns, but to just go to that example, what you do in your meditation, first, you see the situation with as much of the benefit of the doubt being given to that other person. So you see them in the most loving light possible. Okay, maybe there's a lot of stress on them. They were acting unconsciously. They didn't purposely want to create this uncomfortable dissonance in my field, but they did it unconsciously, and that's what happened. So you first give them the full benefit of the doubt, and then you can take that one step further and observe it from their perspective. Again, trying to see all of the possible good reasons or ways that it could be them actively not trying to hurt you. Because most people that are trying to hurt you, unless they're sadistic, which I guess I don't think that's a high like percentage of the population. Most people are unconsciously perpetuating this trauma to each other without really realizing it or without trying to do it. So you give that person the full benefit of the doubt. You see the situation from their side and try to understand it in the most accepting and understanding way. And then you can also take yourself out of either of your two bodies, either yourself at the time and their body, seeing it from their perspective and see it from the third person perspective. And from that perspective, try to understand how insignificant that situation truly is in the grand scheme of things, right? Our life is only, a blink. It's an instant in the whole span of the universal time. Our physical body is smaller than a grain of sand compared to, the vast reaches of space all around us. Everything that happens in our life, it might seem really powerful and really impactful, but really it's such a small thing, and when it's compared to the true majesty of the universe. And that majesty of the universe really is our true self. So our true self is that entirety, that whole. So what you do is you try to put yourself into that modality, and it can be hard when you're first starting out, but just, give yourself with affirmation, say, I am the whole, I am the universe, and I'm seeing this through the eyes of the witness as the universe. And, those affirmations really build that perspective over time. And the more you do that, the easier it's going to be to kind of sink into that state. And then, as I was saying earlier, from that witness universal perspective, you watch the situation playing out as a movie and you see, okay, maybe for these two little characters, it might have seemed like a really big, important confrontation that caused a lot of stress and trauma. But from the perspective of all of the other actions that are happening in your true highest self, really that trauma is almost, it's almost invisible, right? In that whole ocean of actions. And that ocean can be a really comforting place to be because it is this full motion of life. And when you're from that perspective, you're not attached to your own personal trauma. You're not in that victim mentality, and you can see it as you would from the outside perspective, where you say your coworkers watching this happen, for them it doesn't mean so much. And when you take it from that perspective, then it reduces the impact that trauma has on you, and it makes it less impactful the next time that cycle gets triggered.
I agree. I love this these modalities, like all these things you have explained. And I also do the shaking. I tell my clients, especially we do the hike and meditation class, I start with shaking away, and our imagination is so powerful. If you imagine all of these stressors and all of these things as things attached to your body, attached to you, that you can really push out with this shaking modality, with this shaking movement. And especially because most of the energy is really stored in our belly, especially these kind of like anger kind of energy is really stored in our diaphragm, for example. If you really push out, like if you push out air with your diaphragm while you're doing this, like it really releases you from all of this bad energy, and you push it out, and you're gonna see that you become so present, and you're like, oh, I'm finally here. Where was I before? In PTSD. That's where you were. It's exactly.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to us. So that, and I really will, I love what you said about the trauma at the beginning, and I would like to give my own standpoint on that, because I think the only thing we can actually exchange in the world, the only currency we can actually exchange is time. And so time is the only real form of love, because the only thing that truly exists in our universe right now that we can actually spend is the time, because time determines what shape the next moment is going to take. And so if you dedicate your present to do this, then you're going to go in this direction. If you use your time in this moment to go to the right, then you're going to grow to the right. And so if you dedicate time to heal someone, that's a form of love, because that's the only thing you can give. It's time. And so the only way of healing ourselves and our trauma and avoid for those things to become triggers for us is to go back in time and dedicate some time to it. And maybe today you're going to dedicate 1 second to look back at your trauma and observe yourself. You look at yourself in the past, going through trauma, going through abuse, going through whatever has been the traumatic event that triggered your PTSD. So maybe today you're going to look at it for 1 second and it's going to be painful. And then tomorrow you're going to look at it 2 seconds and it's going to be painful. And then the day after, you're going to look at it more and more. And the more you look at it, the more you give love to it. And instead of scapegoating that part of you and thinking, I don't want to be that thing, because that thing is someone who got hurt. And so I have to be different, because I can't be that anymore, because that thing is a loser, is a bad example, a bad reference. Instead of doing that, you start understanding that you just didn't know any better, or there was the other person that hurt you didn't know any better. And once you understand that and you see things from the whole perspective, that you're missing it, because once we got traumatized, those things just get into our brain and they get stored in a very corner of our brain, and we stop thinking about them. And so we just have, the only thing that we remember about them is how they hurt. So once you start looking at those things and observing them from a more objective standpoint, now that you're healed, or you're better, or you're grown up and you're not a little child anymore, now that you've changed, now that you have more awareness on what actually happened, or we want to gain more awareness, now that you're a little bit farther from the trauma, you can look at it, and then you will get to a point where you're going to be able to look at the entirety of the situation for a longer time. And by doing that, you're actually opening a portal of love from the present to the past, so that you heal your whole line of between past and present and future. And by doing that, you allow yourself to get rid of the trauma, to resolve your trauma, to overcome PTSD, and to bloom in the future, instead of keep going in this fight or flight mode in which you're really zigzagging, trying to avoid obstacles and escape from things. You're not consciously building your future. And so this is a very important thing to say. And I thank you, Robbie, for mentioning that, because we really have to give time to ourselves and to our past self to heal. And time means dedicating time to observe, dedicating time to be with that version of ourselves that it's hurt. And so we really need to love. Love is the ultimate word to overcome PTSD, to give love to ourselves, to give love to others. And love means that if you love people, even if they're abusers, if you love them, you have compassion towards them instead of becoming the sadistic perpetuator of the abuse against them as well. And so once you have that love, once you have that compassion, then you can forgive. And once you forgive, you can heal too, because at that point you become just the natural consequence of someone else's trauma. Your trauma becomes the natural consequence of someone else's trauma dispersing towards you. PTSD is nothing else than you absorbing the trauma that someone else was trying to disperse and outsourced the handling of their trauma to you. Mm-hmm. And so you're handling their trauma because they can. So once you understand that these people simply can't do any better, you really start forgiving them. And at that point, you forgive yourself for falling in their traps or for becoming their victim or for falling into depression or for falling into whatever mechanism, compulsive thinking, compulsive behaviors, gambling. Gambling is another thing that can be part of PTSD. So many things that are basically bad decision-making that are part of PTSD that really cause so much pain and so much suffering in our life. But once we understand that it's just a physiological mechanism that we don't have control over as much as other people don't have control over that trauma, once you understand that you dedicate time and forgiveness and compassion and love, then you can heal. You can heal from PTSD. It just takes time because our body physiology needs to heal. Our body oxidation needs to get back to normal. Our vibrations need to get refocused. Our energies need to get more sattva. So it's really like we need to rebalance, recalibrate, regain control, remember who we truly are, remember our true pure essence. And once we do that, then it's just the natural way in which it goes. We just naturally become healthier. We just naturally overcome PTSD. Do you probably have anything to add?
So just a couple things to add before we close this episode. Number one, when you were describing that breath that you do when you shake, where you're like pumping your diaphragm, that's actually, a yogic breath. It's called Kapalabhati, and it's both a pranayama, which means, a breathing technique to control the energy, but it's also a cleansing technique. So it is getting rid of both physical and energetic toxins in your system when you're doing this. So it's, again, very powerful about that. And then one thing I wanted to add that I forgot to mention for the meditation that I've described, another really important step in that process is giving love to both you in that situation and the person or situation that caused you that trauma. And, as hard as it might be, just giving that love to it, because that love is your healing energy. When you give love to yourself, you heal yourself. And exactly what I was saying before about, having that kind of temporal wound. It's like this wound that's tied to a particular time. And this is very applicable to what we call the inner child. The inner child is the wounds that happened when you were an early child. And the way to heal those is to give that same inner child love. And that's, this love can span across time and space. It goes back in time and actually heals that wound when it happened. And that change then blossoms into your life as you see it now. And yeah, so love is really the cure for all of these things. If you can really embody, if you can really be brave enough to give yourself love, then that's how you can start to heal from these things. And yeah, so thank you everyone for listening to this episode. I really hope that, especially you can take some of these strategies and try them out, and let us know if you try these strategies. Let us know what happens. Let us know, if it's helping you, if you have any questions related to it, what you experience, and we'd be happy to enter into that conversation with you. And it's been a pleasure to present this episode to you. And thank you, Nancy, for joining me on this one. And yeah, we look forward to sharing more with you guys on the next one.
Absolutely. And please use the Q&A section on Spotify or the comment section on YouTube, or I don't know how Apple Podcast works, because I'm an Android girl. So if you guys want to comment or just contact us on Instagram or through our email, you can find me at my website 360holisticcoach.com, or also on Instagram at 360holistic.coach. That's it. No .com. holistic.coach, and Robie at Robie Newman-Paris on Instagram as well. So please message us or let us know what you think, and if you tried these strategies and if they work or if it didn't work. There's so many more things we can talk about, and we can give you so many more suggestions to overcome your PTSD. Hopefully this has been helpful, and thank you everybody, and have a good day.
See you on the next one, everyone. Bye-bye.